Hey, welcome back. It's Forked AI, and we have a full cast of characters today, Mr. Bevere. Dave is going to be joining. Oh, look, there he comes right now. Exciting. Good to see you, Mr. Moses.
I'm very sorry about the delay, gentlemen.
Sorry, you just missed my amazing opening. Jack, good to see you. Jack, why don't you go ahead and introduce our guest today, and we'll just jump into a lively conversation. I had a wild night until 2 a.m. last night with Claude Code and Codex, so can't wait to discuss that.
Nice. Yeah, it is my pleasure to have Kris Garin of Riparian Capital Partners on the podcast. Kris is someone who we have talked to on the Real Investor Radio podcast previously, as he is a very prolific renovator, community developer, residential investment expert, and is active in Baltimore as well as a number of other cities, and has a very, very interesting platform approach to building a rental portfolio. And I have had the pleasure of knowing Kris for a number of years now and working with him as we're both very active in Baltimore. And just another thing that we happen to also share is that Kris and his team have always been very tech forward in their approach to the business. And so as AI kind of hit the scene, not surprisingly, those guys have been on the front edge of that curve the entire time. So a secret, desire of mine, this for even, getting involved in this podcast, was David, to get you and Kris talking together. And I just want to be a fly on the wall and watch you two just like go at it. Because I think you guys are two of the most innovative people that I've met in terms of the real estate investment space as it relates to AI tools. So Kris, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Really been looking forward to the conversation, and thanks for your time.
It's nice to meet you, Kris.
So guys, I'll start us off and maybe spark some conversation here. Yesterday was a real unlock. Dave, I really just wanted to call you to go like, man, something happened today that was just wild. And I'm McClellan, our AI god here at Dominion, developed this kind of starter kit, if you will, that basically, for lack of a better word, Jack, I really look at it as it's almost like Cursor, in that it's just got a really beautiful interface, but the starter kit basically gives you all the connectors that you need, the Salesforce API, Outlook API, Ring Central API, all the enterprise tools that we use here. And then it allows you to build on top of that. And so yesterday I was playing around with it I was working, and I decided to basically build like a phone burner app for LOs so that we could basically select a list of leads, press a button, and that starts a phone burner session where you can quick dial people. And so I talked to it for about an hour, Dave. I was just sitting there kind of explaining the problem, explaining what I wanted to do. And I've done that before, but I think as you get better at prompting, you speak in a much more sort of structured way. And for the first time, Dave, I was able to walk away from the computer for an hour and a half. And basically I told it right before I set it free. I said, build me a PRD with very, very specific tasks that can be implemented and then verified, and then move on to the next. But I want a team of agents that are doing this in parallel and in sequential. And it wrote me a PRD that was probably, I think it was 830 lines. And like 9 phases. And so it one-shotted a really incredible sort of mock-up GUI, because I told it, I was like, just make it so that all of the data works, and so that we structure it properly so it can fit into a bigger GUI that I've already built. And that's kind of like phase 9. So it was really incredible what happened, man, that it just one-shotted phone burner for me, essentially. Connected to Salesforce, connected to Ring Central, connected to Outlook, dispositions, and it works beautifully. So really, really exciting. Then at about 2 a.m. last night, I was telling Jack, I decided to do a battle royale with Codex and Codex 5.5 and Claude. And I said, take a look at the PRD, take a look at the entire project that I'm building and the PRD, not just for the phone burner part, but for the bigger project. And I said, let me know what you think, Codex, of this. And it gave me some things to think about. And one of the things that we talked about last week on the podcast, Dave, I don't know if you remember or not, but Jack was talking about the product that he was building, and it sort of fell over on itself because you keep bolting on things like more functionality and more functionality. And so that's exactly what Codex told me I was doing. It was like, you're doing a lot, but you're putting it all in this starter kit rather than building modularity, like tools that you can just sort of plug into the starter kit. So that was a real unlock, and I'll probably be working on making it more modular today. So crazy day yesterday. Get your guys' thoughts on that.
You're you're reminding me of the phrasing God object, which is what happens when you build a gigantic piece of code that's supposed to do everything.
Yeah.
And what I found is, as I'm trying to like come up with stuff, I do that, and the tools, and I usually am working in Claude Code. That's the sort of force of gravity, and I just every so often you kind of have to stop and just go through a refactoring exercise and say break this into 4 or 5 different things, and you spend some time talking about how to do that, and then it just does that, and it's pretty quick,
Yeah, it's
and
pretty
then you
quick.
kind of keep going. But I think that's exactly been my experience, is like you build these things and they just get big and top heavy, and like you have this great idea, and it's like it's amazing how easy it is to play. And but I also think like there's no other way to learn that than to do it, and the cost of that lesson now versus what that education would have taken months ago, and certainly years ago. It's just like, that's the thing. It's like those mistakes are cheaper than they've ever been, but they're still the mistakes that I think we have to go through in order to build something that, has any real durability to it.
Yeah,
Hey,
Chris, I
Kris,
I I wanna jump into, like, how you started and, like, sort of the evolution and, like, where you are today. Yeah, I mean, we can jump off on that if you like. I'd love to hear about, like, everybody started working with ChatGPT trying to figure out how to write with it, but, when did you really start taking advantage of the tools?
Yeah,
and also, would you mind just giving, for those who didn't hear the Real Investor Radio episode, just give folks a background on your real estate and property management business so they understand kind of the scope of what you're trying to tackle from an ops perspective?
sure, sure. Riparians started in 2019, and that was kind of act three for me professionally. First decade or so of my career was in journalism. I actually worked in newspapers, magazines. I wrote a few books about business, interviewed one too many people who was having more fun than I was in business, got myself to grad school, unexpectedly fell in love with real estate, which I've kind of come to think about as like three-dimensional checkers. Like there's no one part of it that's all that complex, but somehow when it all comes together, it's just completely insane. And I spent most of the next decade in investment banking, raising equity for public and private real estate operators, and really a lot of emerging managers, emerging asset classes, more kind of unusual structures, and got to see a lot of both the emergence of workforce housing, as an institutional asset class in apartments, and the emergence of single family rental as an institutional asset class, full stop. And so, I kind of got more and more convinced that the workforce segment of scattered site, the naturally occurring affordable housing, it was an aging but critical segment of our housing infrastructure. It was underinvested, a lot of aging ownership that needed a succession plan and a transition, and that would be an interesting place to focus. And so we started Repairing in 2019, got into Baltimore in 2020 with a portfolio acquisition. Thought we were going to do kind of third party property management with hands on asset management. We ended up taking over property management fairly early, and today we've got uh, about 800 units in the city of Baltimore, overwhelmingly row houses. We manage in our fund and own about 2,200 units total. We're also in Pittsburgh and Detroit, Cleveland, a few other places in Ohio mostly. And a lot of what we've done has been through some interesting transactions where owners who've got, they've owned these assets for a long time, they're looking for an exit, they've got a tax issue, where they're able to actually come into our fund by contributing the assets and taking back equity. And so that's been an interesting structure too. And so, operationally intensive, never expected to be a property manager. We've actually, gone back and forth on third party in-house, and we've done it, different ways in different markets. And I think there's probably more than one right answer to that question. But the whole thing about scattered site is everybody struggles with it because there's just so much information, right? And there's so many small decisions and so many handoffs. And so, beating our head against that wall from the beginning, it's easy to say we're going to go in and kind of like institutionalize this. You buy something from a mom and pop owner and you realize like, you're worse at it than they were. And you're like, wait a minute, you can't make that up in volume. You gotta actually like figure out things that work. And so that's kind of where we were in, that's our business. And then kind of segueing to the tech and the AI stuff. That's kind of where we were in, I'd say, kind of like, early 2023, when this kid from Stanford was like looking for a property management sandbox. He wanted to try some stuff with utilities and there's sort of like one degree of separation. And he came in and he built something that I think today you could probably figure out, with Claude Code and a bunch of time, and it wouldn't be as good as what he built, but at that time, it felt like magic. It went into utilities, as I think most of your listeners know, in our space, particularly in jurisdictions where the water utility is municipal or quasi municipal, like, are always a real pain point. And so he built something for us that went into the utility portal, pulled the bills, kind of integrated with our tenant ledgers, handled the payments, all that stuff. And it wasn't perfect, but it worked really, really well. And it was something that we really weren't able to manage effectively almost at any cost in-house, because it was just a lot of moving parts, and it was hard to get people to focus on it when all the other kind of, you know, bullets are whizzing over your head, right? Trying to get through the day in property management. And then, and so this was kind of when like ChatGPT was like amazing, but it was kind of like, hey, read me the Bill of Rights in the style of Jay-Z, and like, that was like a kind of amazing party trick, and like, that was an amazing party trick, but like, and we saw, that these tools were already replacing like actual work, and that wasn't like a future state kind of thing. And so made a decision in early 2024 that like whatever we did, we were going to try to be organized about it, and started a journey of developing some of this stuff in-house. We have, we've definitely done some interesting things. We've learned a bunch along the way, and I think are settling into like a middle path on kind of, how much infrastructure, how much kind of ad hoc point solution, all that sort of stuff. But that's kind of how we got to today. And I'd say a lot of, if the AI is kind of calculus, right? A lot of, I'd say like the vast majority even, of the journeys has been algebra, and it's just been the basics of organizing information. And particularly, and this has sort of become my obsession, perhaps, beyond the point where it has like a lot of business utility, but the stuff that never gets written down. And how do you start to kind of find ways to fill in the gaps there, where, in a traditional way, running an organization, you would never document these things because it just, there's no value to it, right? You get somebody 85% up the curve, come in a bullpen, and then there's the rest kind of gets solved through osmosis and common sense, but you can't leverage AI that way. Right. And so, thinking about, how much of the challenge and the opportunity here is technical, sure, like obviously, but like if you just froze the technical development even 6 months ago, like you could do stuff that looks like science fiction if you could perfectly organize your data, but nobody can perfectly organize their data. And so I think the journey for us is like, we keep getting painfully pulled short and brought back to questions of like context and schema and like fundamental stuff. And we do that because we build these cathedrals on foundations of sand, and then we find their limitations, and then we kind of come back. And so we've been able to put in place some cool stuff, which I'll happy to talk about, but I'll stop there.
So what's the team look like from an operations perspective, like from a property management and real estate perspective? And then what's the team look like from the tech side?
Yeah.
What's your balance?
So we've really got two people running our kind of in-house tech effort, and then they'll leverage some outside engineering when needed, although less and less of that, except for like really, really, really high value stuff. So, on the property management front, we've got property manager, running the market, APMs. We have somebody, overseeing compliance. We have somebody who, manages sort of the physical, property services, repair, maintenance, turns, stuff like that. So that team, in Baltimore is, plus or minus, 15, 20 people, right? It kind of ebbs and flows, a little bit. You know, we've actually gotten out of property management in Pittsburgh and in Detroit. We still do it in Cleveland because we found local operators. We felt we're actually, you know, just more ensconced with some of the local relationships, particularly compliance and inspections and things like that. You know, there's just a real hometown dynamic there that you know is tough to overcome. That's I think the idea has always been, and we've explored it with greater or lesser success at various points, but the idea has always been, you know, we want to really embed the sort of product perspective in the operations as deeply as possible and create the conversations that never organically happen. Because I think what's different, right, is not that like um the engineering genius is like going to be more interested in really understanding your business. Like that's you know, that's never really going to change. It's not going to be where that person's interest is. It's also not going to be the best use of for those really expensive hours, right? You know, what's changed is how much closer the business people can get to understanding what they need to provide in order to like make good engineering solutions possible. And so trying to figure out how do we kind of embed this product literacy, you know, in the operating team and then the operations literacy, you know, with whoever's kind of anchoring that product effort. That's sort of the magic. And again, it comes down to this, like, it's like the context is the tacit knowledge. I mean, if you sit a bunch of property management employees around a table and you bring in, you know, a couple of engineers to do a product discovery session, there's going to be a lot of like, it sounds like you're doing this, right? And then people are going to just nod their head because they're going to be comfortable and they're going to want to get out of that room as quickly as possible. And then like, you know, you're going to get something that's technically correct, but like mediocre, right? Because they're building what they were asked to build. And so it's like, how do you create that conversation? Like that's the hardest part. And that's what's so interesting about, you know, stuff like, you know, what Craig was talking about, right? Is you can, like, he knows exactly what he wants. And so,
Yep.
he, you know, the time he would have spent explaining it to an engineer who then goes and he can just spend getting it wrong and getting it wrong and getting it wrong until he gets it right. And it's like, when he gets it right, it's going to be amazing. And it's actually not more time than it would have taken in the old way. Right. And, you know, so I think it's all, it's people stuff. Like it's all more than ever, you know, which is a little ironic, but you know, I think it's, and I think the gap between groups that are literate enough in the tech but also like thoughtful and sensitive enough about the people, you know, and the ability to articulate like the real operating need. I think that's like where the magic's going to happen.
So
I
just
sorry, go
go
ahead.
ahead, Dave. Yeah.
Uh, I mean, I definitely completely understand and agree with what you're saying. What I kind of connected really well with is when you have an engineer sitting with a property manager. And I think that one thing we've talked a lot about on this podcast is just, you know, the engineer has been the technical expert who essentially is a glorified translator, right? They're taking, you know, this is what the property manager does, this is what their pain points are, this is what they're trying to solve, and they just translate that to code and something happens. But what, you know, you miss a lot there because first of all, you miss all the opportunities of what how could this be done differently? Not just differently, but better. And I think you also, you know, like you said, you just there's something there's so much lost in that translation that if you just had that person, that property manager, able to just, you know, screw up, create something, waste some time, then I think they would be able to fix it and the end product would be significantly better. But that whole system hasn't existed yet. Like it exists now, but most of the property managers, most of the people actually on the ground doing the thing, they don't understand that these tools even exist. And the ones that do, I think are, you know, I think I'm very excited over the next, you know, 6 months to a year at how that's going to evolve because I think that what Craig and Jack built with this toolkit, you know, it's really just like that's really just handing over the keys to the car and saying, you know, figure out how to drive. You know, like here's I'm going to show you where the shifter is. I'm going to show you where the steering wheel is. I'm going to generally tell you the rules at a very high level. But just go ahead and drive and figure see if you can get where you're going. See if you can get where you
Skip the
want.
learner's permit, go straight to driving. Yes.
So
You might.
I think that's right. I have also been humbled, and not in like humbled to accept this award like sense, you know, by the realization that like there are a lot of people who like just do not give a shit about any of this, and like that's actually fine, and so I think yes, but also I think there's still something, a special ingredient. There's something about there's curiosity. Like you have to be curious and like a little perverse and ambitious in a certain kind of way, like intellectually ambitious, in a way that anybody at any level could be. But like, many people, if not most people, are not, which doesn't make them bad at their jobs and doesn't make them. And I think, it has taken me some time to realize that just because I think this is the most exciting thing in the world doesn't mean I can infect everybody around me with that enthusiasm. And so I think, yeah, 100% making that accessible, but also figuring out like you know, who becomes, who of the 5 people doing the same job is excited by that, and how do you empower them, you know, rather than trying to turn all 5 of them into something that like delicate. Because I've tried it a few different ways, and it's that curiosity is like, that's actually like the one ingredient that like you can't do any of this without. Like if you don't actually find it really interesting, then you don't power through all the mistakes and all the everything. And that's, it's like something that, that generally people aren't hired for or screened for, in these roles. And by the way, don't necessarily need to do, because using the tool once it's built is fine. And that's good enough, right? Like, not everybody has to be a builder, and not everybody has to be like a forward deployed engineer. And, figuring out like how to strike that balance is something I still haven't totally nailed. We've gotten it wrong in both directions is all I can, is all I can tell you, as we've been sort of, but that's because like I'm one of the people who's like, I'm like, give me the keys. Like, no, like I don't need to read the manual. I just want to like grind on the gears, I'm like, and it's fine. But not everybody's like, happy to fail in public and like do all the stuff that like we do in order to learn that stuff. So I think there is always going to be a barrier there that's not technical, but it's, again, there's just like a different kind of person, is going to be empowered by like this constellation of opportunities than is the kind of person who would have been empowered by the dominant constellation 5-10 years ago. And figuring exactly who that is and how they rise and how you identify them and how you support them is going to be, it's going to be really interesting.
So my favorite experiment that I have going on right now, because there's this like Americans are afraid of losing their jobs to AI, when in fact I think they're going to lose their jobs to other Americans who are using AI. And a lot of the commentary has been that, well, the AI is not replacing higher skilled work. It's helping create tools. And if that's a threat to any humans, it's probably a threat to the VAs, right? Because the work that we have as small businesses outsourced to the Philippines and Colombia and Egypt are the easiest work to just have the manager teach an AI how to do. So I was like, that's a fun use case, or that sparked a devious idea. So one of the Filipina VAs that we work with is a recruiter, and she's been a recruiter for 10 years. She comes in, she's an external recruiter. She uses LinkedIn Recruiter. She uses Jazz HR is basically like to organize, basically like a CRM for recruiting. So she's got the LinkedIn Recruiter account. We use Culture Index from a personality profiling perspective, and we've got a database of freaking like a million resumes, like an insane number of resumes over the past like 15 years. And so she gets in, a month and a half ago, she starts using all the different systems, and she's done a couple placements for us. And she's just paid hourly. She's staff, and works with our HR team and brings people in, and she's a recruiter, right? So I sat her down and I was just like, hey, download Claude Desktop. Here's I invited you to the account. I was like, how to do your job better than anybody else. You were the best recruiter, right? Like you've been doing this for 10 years. Here's how you use it. And she saw me, I demoed that like Baltimore public records database thing that I put together. And she was just like, oh my God, you're so amazing at AI. This is amazing. And I was just like, no. Like, I'm just a housing nerd that like, so I knew what to tell it. And I said, and you are a recruiter. You know exactly what you need so that you don't have to context switch between the 4 different systems that you have to log into. And so, hey, just build exactly what you want. And here's how you connect things, and here's how APIs work. And I sat her down for 30 minutes. it couldn't have been more than 30 minutes. But we like downloaded Claude Desktop and I invited her and she clicked the link and I said, hey, here's where you start typing, and told her about sessions and folders and that stuff. Just the basics, the real basics, right? Gave her a learner's permit. And then I just got rid of the limit on her tokens and I said, go. And she gives me a daily update of where her app's at. And it's pretty damn I think we're like 4 days into it and it's like getting damn good, like damn good. So if you want to freak out the Americans, you're not like the Americans who don't learn AI are not going to lose their job. The Americans who don't want to learn AI are going to lose their jobs to the Filipinas who learn AI. And that's the threat, right? Is like, if you don't want to pick up these tools, there are people all across the world who are very interested in working and might be more motivated than you. And I don't know whether they're motivated by fear or greed. I don't really care. But Serena with Claude Code is the best recruiter that Dominion has ever met. So I'm really excited about that.
Well, I
That's
think, I think there's, going to be a lot of people who are 2 or 3 times more effective than people who aren't using AI. There's going to be a smaller number of people who are like 10 times more effective, and organizations. And then there's going to be a handful that are like 100 times. Right. And so those gaps are going to compound, particularly in the next 3-5 years, before the new table stakes become clear. And then whatever that is, it'll be what it'll be. Right. Like, I've got an opinion on interest rates too. Doesn't matter. Really, like, doesn't matter. But like, in between, there's going to be these gaps, and that's, and I think what happens in the space between those various gaps is going to be super, super interesting. In some areas, potentially seismic; in other areas, just meaningful shifts. But I think to be, I think you want to for sure be one of the 2 to 3 times, like, just to protect your ass. It'd be really nice to be one of the 10 times. And I don't think anybody gets to know whether they were going to be one of the 100 times until it's in the rearview mirror and dust has settled and it's all over. So like, don't think about that, but I think,
I agree with that.
Yeah, Dave.
So we talk a lot about like what's going to happen, and everyone's worried, and how do we as small businesses actually move the needle forward? What do we do with our people? And I think that I've had so many different thoughts on this and ideas, and I think what it comes down to is growth comes from struggle. And I think that as we remove resources, people, tools, expensive things that we're paying for, and put people in a position where they have to struggle to do more with less, combined with the tools to do that, I think that human nature is to adapt. And I think the people who will adapt eventually, I think you accelerate that process. I think I think I said it last time or the week before. I think people are scared. And I think at some point, that fear is either going to motivate somebody to do something, or it is going to be something that happens. They lose their job. They get put in a situation where they have to struggle, and only then will they start to move forward. So, and I agree that all of those things are okay. Right? I think all of those people are going to be okay. It's just a matter of putting them in a position to get there faster. And I think it's struggle. I think we put people in a position where they have to, they don't have this person to rely on anymore because that person's gone, or that person has been moved to another part of the company, or you remove a tool that was expensive and clunky and didn't integrate well with anything. And they were relying on that. And all of a sudden they have to struggle. And now it's like, oh, but by the way, we've got this tool here. We've got these tools here. And if you use them, you can recover from the loss of this thing. And I think putting people in a position where they have to adapt, I think you're going to get people to that moment faster. And maybe you'll be able to save some people, in the organization who really needed to struggle before they got up to do anything. And sometimes those people can be really, really good at it.
Yeah, I hear that.
I think that's a perfect articulation of it. And I think what it captures is like, this is a people moment. Like, these are not, like, you didn't name a single technical challenge.
No.
In making that point, right?
Yeah.
So
most people.
I met with a young guy just out of college. We actually interviewed him here at Dominion, and he went to work for a fairly significant self-storage development company, and basically spends his entire day just searching through, scouring CoStar, looking for land opportunities. And obviously they have their box of check marks that he's got to figure out. And so we met, had a couple drinks no more than a month and a half ago. And this kid had never touched AI. But he had that thing, Kris. He had that curiosity, and he had that creative curiosity. And he was like, well, tell me what you're doing. And I had an app that I built for the badge scanner, Jack. Like, went to a conference, and they charge $450 or $600 for you to scan a badge at a conference, and that's per person. So I was like, well, the hell with that. I'll just build an app that scans the badge and saves all the leads, and it worked perfectly. So I was showing him this and a couple other things I built, and he was like, I got to go home. I'm going home right now. And he calls me the next day. He's like, I'm up until 2 a.m. Fast forward a month and a half later, this kid is literally working next to the CEO now. CEO can't believe what he's built. And he came by the office yesterday, Jack, and showed me what he's built. And it is mind blowing what this kid built. It is mind blowing what he's built in a month and a half. So it's that creative curiosity. It's that just unleashing people on great tools. And kid has never wrote a line of code in his life. And yeah, it's exactly what.
Kris, what's what for everyone's benefit, what's the tech stack that you're working on, both from a traditional software perspective as well as what are you guys building stuff in?
So AppFolio is our property management, MGL. So a lot of things kind of run off of that. We schedule repair and maintenance off of something called Zuper for like field services management. And, we've got Dialpad and for phones, and, we've got an asset management kind of investor portal called Juniper Square, which a lot of the groups use. Some other stuff. That's kind of the core company-wide stack. What we decided in early 2024 was that we were going to abandon everything that wasn't open API. And so we really embarked on the project, and we spent, fortune, to do stuff that now I think you could do for a fraction of that. And probably a lot of that is going to get just chucked, because like what you could do now is better, but that's fine. That's like that, that's, you buy the ticket, you take the ride. But so at the time, we kind of came in on the tail end of no code. So we really went all in on Xana, which is a low code, no code database. And basically we pulled everything, basically said like, we don't care if you integrate with AppFolio because everything integrates with us and we can make the connections there. So, that was really the journey of, 2024 to kind of get everything into that mode. And we were able to do things really fast at that time. That was like pre-Claude Code, that was, and so, it you don't really hear people talking about low code, no code anymore, which is really interesting. Right.
Just everything is.
Yeah.
It's just right because it's and there's a comment I want to circle back and make about what's not important and what's still very important. We got all that in, and then we were able to do some really cool things. So we decided we wanted to use voice AI to answer phones and schedule maintenance calls and all that stuff, and we kind of demoed the various tools that were available on the market, and it didn't really feel that any of them really kind of understood what we needed to do. And so we stood up something in basically 6 weeks.
With 11 labs?
What's that?
Did you use 11 labs for it?
We use 11 labs for the voice. And then, it comes in. So phone call comes in through, Dialpad, it gets routed to the 11 labs agent. It's, there's various kind of, prompt injections happening. So it knows who it's talking to, what unit it's talking to. Ultimately it goes through the entire process of triaging a maintenance request, figures out the amount of time required to put on the schedule, figures out where that property is, who on the maintenance schedule. So you can schedule the whole thing. It'll go to the appropriate maintenance tech with the appropriate skill set on the right side of town, pick 2 or 3 windows. And this is all conversational, right? And it's pretty good. We over-indexed on what was emergencies because we were, and so it was, that cost us some overtime, but we figured it was cheap insurance. And then we sort of tuned it. And so, we didn't get it where it is today in 6 weeks, but we went from 0 to 1 in 6 weeks because everything was on that platform. You know what I mean? And so what we learned. So, that's, and now like all of our calls come in, right? And so maintenance calls get fully scheduled. If it's a billing question, whatever, it'll get triaged and then it'll turn into a ticket. That's already that goes to a property manager who's like, this is the issue, this is the resident, this is their history, this is whatever. So they're able to, they're not going to spend 25 minutes on the phone listening to somebody's story. They're going to come call them back with a solution.
That's awesome.
And so that's been pretty good.
I have a couple questions about that.
Yeah.
And David, for Chris's benefit, give 30 seconds on your tech stack so Kris understands your context.
So we also use Dialpad. We use Appfolio. We also have a community management company that does like HOA and condo association management. That's in a software called Cinc, C-I-N-C. We we basically mirror all of our property management databases to Mongo, which is it's a NoSQL database. And we actually just stood up an after hours maintenance agent as well. And we're kind of struggling our way through, how does it get more context? How does it have that context faster, and kind of playing around with all of that. But that's essentially my tech stack. I do love Dialpad because, webhooks for every step of the call. You can really do a lot with it. But I guess my question twofold. Number one, do you kind of like create a certain number of tokens worth of context, like programmatically every, so that context is ready if a call comes in? Is all the data just in the databases?
Oh, it's all in the database.
And it's actually making a call and trying to pull that and then
So
pulling that data back.
there's a tool. It's making a tool call to, so it matches the phone number.
Mhm.
So the first thing is, hi, so and so, it's, here's your calling from, 123 Main Street. Is that right? And then it'll pull up, it'll pull that up. And so, there'll be, by the time it's done, it'll create a work order. We don't use Appfolio for work order management, but they have to match.
What do you use? Okay.
Because we found for scheduling and assigning and photograph, like all that stuff, we couldn't figure out how to do a good job, managing a, distributed workforce in the field using Appfolio to manage their time.
I agree with that.
During
We
the
use
course of
Property Meld, which I'm not.
Yeah, Property Meld. We came very close to using Property Meld.
I'm not recommending it or not recommending it.
Yeah, no, we liked it. I think Zuper was they were super open. So like we were able to get right on the phone with their product people. They were excited that we were trying to do what we were trying to do. We had conversations with them, and so it was like, so we were able to say, hey, what could you do this? And they're like, yeah, we could do that. You know what I mean? And stuff. So it was helpful in that way. We use Company Cam. So now, like if we send somebody to due diligence on Company Cam, like we're basically just using that as a front end to collect photographs, and then everything gets sucked into our database, and the AI is doing like Claude Vision and all that stuff. Like we'll analyze like the plate, on the water heater to inventory what the item is, all that stuff. And like, so, but there's like a combination, like you have to like do a little bit of description on the photo.
Mhm. So,
and have it append, and then it's like if Claude is looking at the photo with that little bit of context,
that's right.
it's totally different.
Yep. That is absolutely the key there is give it. Like we haven't coached any of our, you say Company Cam. Is that where like somebody is dispatched, they don't work for you, but somebody's dispatched to go and take pictures?
Well, it's for anybody, but we use it for kind of due diligence and acquisitions and stuff. So
Gotcha, okay.
you can assign anybody contractors, whatever, but it's very good about geotagging, and then it's got all these AI features that we totally ignore.
Yeah. It's funny because we went to Dialpad because it had all these AI features.
Yeah.
We didn't use a single one of them.
Yeah. Because what the Company Cam AI thing, which is, it's not bad, but what it does is you can walk through, you can narrate, take photos, talk to the thing while you're going, and then it'll produce like a pretty good report in PDF. It's just like a dead document.
No, that's great. We wind up ingesting kind of like everything that the tenant called in about the chat history because in Property Meld, they chat
Yep.
with the tech or the
Yeah.
manager in Property Meld. Any phone calls, we take the transcripts of those or the summaries of the transcripts of those phone calls. All that becomes context in every single AI run through a photo. So it really has, and then
Yep.
we analyze all the photos
That's
in a
great.
particular work order. We kind of give them a description and call out any red flags, whatever it is, on a photo by photo basis. But that all kind of just that becomes the context for the whole work order review, which kind of because you could have a picture of this and it's missing some data that is in another picture. So it really
Yes.
needs the whole, kind of the whole
Yep.
suite of pictures to do it. But
Yep.
Company Cam, I haven't played with, so I really don't.
So what we started, we've been using it for a long time, but like what I wanted to do was, so we're walking a large multifamily property and trying to come up with with the CapEx budget kind of kind of to see if we're going to make an offer, whatever. And so we basically came up with it's a structured kind of like going to each unit, take these pictures. We've got a checklist in there, do these, right? And then all of that gets sucked into our database. And then, so that's kind of one pipe of context. And then we've got, our cost tables, another pipe of context. Then we've got like our AIA contract format, another pipe of context.
Mhm.
And it does like a pretty darn good first pass. And it's like just what we think. It's just an expression of our view, right? Like nobody has to do anything. It's just, because the algebras and what, like there's almost no AI in there.
Yeah,
There's
you go-
almost zero AI.
yeah,
There's almost zero AI in there, right? It's basically just, it's like approximating square footage and like high, medium, low. Like, is this, are these mechanicals at the end of their life, kind of midlife or new, right? Like very basic, high level stuff,
mhm.
and then it's like, I see mold. Like Claude sees mold. Claude's like, you want to take a closer look at this unit. And then also it's like, you can feed it. We always ask for like a 12-month history of work orders. And it'll say, there's a concentration of lead calls, in this end of the building. Figure out what's going on. You know what I mean? And so that's where we focus. It's pretty great.
No, it is really, really cool.
But it's all, and so this is the thing. Like, I think so. We think about low code, no code, that like we were able to build stuff really quick, but it was like me building an Excel model. And I wasn't doing this, by the way. We brought in somebody who did a bunch of stuff that I don't know how to do. It was very impressive, went very fast, but it was sort of like, it ended up being kind of like a lot of, because you're just making connections. Right. And so, what the hill that I, am now prepared to die on, for all this stuff is, the marginal value of code is like rapidly going down to zero, right? Like code doesn't matter. Architecture matters a lot.
Yep.
Schema matters a lot. And what's interesting is like, the, the, the people who know how to code, they're not important because of their coding ability. And I mean, you need them for quality control and like all that stuff. But like, if you didn't learn how to code, you're starting from zero on like these core questions of architecture, schema, things like this that really, really, I think define, the utility of something and the difference between something that can be very efficient or just be like this big kind of blob that gets very bogged down in itself or whatever it is. And so that's been like when I built these things that topple over, like they've been the most value. So we built a lot of stuff. So what's funny is like low code, no code, like it didn't enforce architecture. And so like we're now kind of actually going, because I'm sort of on the other side of this, and it's not the only way to look at it, but this is sort of where I am on it, is like where we've actually gone into a SQL world for database. Like we're doing everything in Postgres, but it's also super efficient because like nobody's writing SQL code, right? Everybody's just, like Claude Code is great at SQL. So like that's, so it's like, it's, I spend like most of my time when I'm trying to build something thinking about like, the database architecture and like schema and all that stuff. And like, how do you get the stuff that is not written down, into a formal kind of structured way? Because then you can delegate things, at a completely different level.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely true today. Schema, architecture, so ridiculously important. But I don't know if a year from now that's still going to be true because I think that that the models are getting better at exponentially is taking context in whatever format, in whatever haphazard way that it's been memorialized, i.e., a phone call, an email, a text thread. Right? These are inherently unstructured, difficult to understand right now, difficult to understand and make sense of an action on things. But I think that the direction it's heading is that we'll want to just do what we do, right? Have conversations in natural language the way Claude Code takes our ideas and creates some kind of structure and architecture and code behind it. I think that's kind of where it's going to head in the future. And I think that, vector databases become, I think, more important because they understand, it's not just a cell and the field has to be of this type, right? It is, someone's just going to say what they're going to say and the AI is just going to figure it out. And it'll be a question of how much context it has to figure it out. Right. And
I still think though
that's
that
my,
to Chris's point though, Dave, like if it's not, I still think that a data analyst and a data architect are probably so like,
there's no doubt.
And I'm
I
not
just
really,
don't know if that's
I
going to
don't know
hold
if
true.
that's going away.
How
Like,
long is going to be? No, I'm in violent agreement, David, with the with the overall comment. What I think we're going to find, I suspect we're going to find, and like days on which I'm like wrong about my big claims, you generally outnumber the days on which I'm not.
Me too.
Take it with the appropriate grain of salt.
prediction from Kris Garin. Here we go.
You look at like these, these headlines like, oh, like the AI bubble doesn't work because these companies spend, hundreds of millions of dollars and they get no value for the AI projects. And like, that's organizational, right? That's like you're going and you're going to, you're going to be able to stroke a check to have Palantir park a bunch of forward deployed engineers or whatever that is in, at Marriott and just kind of figure it out. Right. But I think in the middle market, in the lower middle market, at the level of, and at the level of individuals who are not animated and excited by the idea of staying up till 2 a.m, explaining the inner workings of their soul to Claude Code, right? Which, believe it or not, like outside of like this little Hollywood squares here is like most people, right? Which I forget, because most people are like, what are you talking about? Or their eyes glaze over. And, I think the big question mark is, is that last 3, 5, 15% of undocumented context, is that a pebble or is that a boulder, right? Is that the stuff that you can't get anywhere because it's like, I know it when I see it and I don't really like to talk about it. And I couldn't explain it to you even if I wanted to, because that's not the kind of person I am. Like, what is like, what is the importance of that? And I don't think we know.
No, yeah.
Right.
I think the answer is we don't know.
That's where it's going to stop. And it's either going to stop at 85% or 99.5% or somewhere in between. And maybe it stops so close to 100% that it doesn't matter anymore. My gut is people being what they are. It's going to be material, but it's not going to matter everywhere. And it's like, somebody explained, or like, is AI like actually intelligent? Like, like if it can sort of fake it well enough that nobody can tell the difference, like, does it matter? Right. For the purposes of like getting done, like it does not matter. Right. For other purposes, probably matters very much. But like, that's I think what it comes down to. Because I think everything you're saying, David, is exactly right. And yet there will be things, that and it's like, is it for want of a nail, the whole structure collapsed? Or is it, actually we can build pretty well without that nail. Thank you very much. That nail wasn't as important as everybody thought it was. It could really be either. I suspect in some combination, in some situations it's going to be one, some situations it's going to be another. But I think technically everything but that, I agree with you, goes away very quickly. And now we find out just how big a deal that actually is.
Yeah. My favorite quote on predictions is, if I had a crystal ball, I would walk differently.
Yogi Berra said that, I never make predictions, especially about the future.
Your comment of staying up and bearing your soul to it until 2 a.m. is hilarious. I had an interesting few evenings where I decided that, so I had this very good friend and she was the global head of talent for BlackRock. in Hong Kong. And then she kind of worked as like the whisperer between like Fink and like all of his VPs. So brilliant. And at the age of like 32. So I knew exactly what she was studied in, and like all of the sort of certifications that she had. And there's one in particular called Enneagram. And if you ever, and this woman was one of the most accomplished coaches and sort of that I've ever met. And she told me about getting this Enneagram certification. And she was like, it was the most grueling thing I've ever had to do, Craig. I would never recommend it to anyone and never go through it. So I thought one night, well, let me just program a skill that it literally is an Enneagram expert. And I told it, and then I said, and I want you to speak to me as sort of like an ontological coach. And there's a whole different coaching paradigm behind that I trained it on. And when I tell you on the second night of having a session with this thing, it told me things about myself that I knew, but like no one has ever verbalized that. And I was like, holy, 2 nights of like talking to this thing for like a half hour. And it's telling me about like subconscious contracts that I made as a kid with my brother, and it nailed it. And I thought to myself, like, what are the use cases, the infinite use cases outside of what we do in our daily lives that are so compelling, that are frankly life-changing and appear to be happening at a more rapid pace these days? And then like, how could you then tune that same knowledge base to talk like Tony Robbins to you, or talk like David Goggins to you, or talk like,
Bernie Madoff.
Or convince your staff, or convince.
I'm telling you, man, it's a powerful thing. I think will only get way more powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. The persuasive, I mean, I think, I've had it with and without the benefit of like various kind of like, personality tests and stuff I've done over the, like, I've had it kind of like assess periodically, like my working style, right. And my decision-making style and like all this stuff and like some of these patterns. And it's very insightful. And it definitely like, it's pretty good at like, I'm like, where am I making the same mistakes over and over again?
Did you guys know
like,
that a couple of days ago, Chris, OpenAI came out with, I think, an add-on. I don't know much about it, just kind of heard about it in passing, where now it can essentially record your screen all day long. And so, if you're a knowledge worker at your computer all day long, you're either training it to make you way better, or training yourself out of a job. I think the jury's still out on that, but it is an interesting. I think you'll be seeing way more of that from the Anthropics and
that's
the OpenAI.
super interesting.
That's the point, right? The point is the point is to train systems so that you don't have to do what it is that you do. The big question mark is what comes next, because it's going to get there. And I think the sooner everybody just realizes it's going to get there, whether at some point you're going to jump on the train, right? It might not be at this station. It might be at the next station or the station after that. But at some point you're going to jump on the train because the train's going.
The thing right now is, I think everybody on this call is sort of, obsessively trying to build their own station. Right. And that's exciting. And like, I can't help, like, I can't help this is like what I'm doing. Right. I'm just like, it is the most interesting thing, to me. But
Chris,
like, is there going to be, is somebody going to just like pop up a nice station with like a nice cappuccino stand and a sandwich shop, like right next to the station we've spent the last 3 years, like trying to build? Then maybe it doesn't even matter. Right. But I think that's like, so for the people being early, it's just another way of being wrong from the standpoint of like investing or whatever. I mean, that's kind of a truism. I think in this case, like, this is all time well spent. I think it's a legitimate question. Like, time will tell, are we educating ourselves in ways we find personally interesting and we'll get some marginal utility, or like how quickly does this stuff all catch up? And I'm kind of taking David's side of the argument about architecture and stuff more than my side. Like, I think the barriers go away on more of like a 5-year kind of timeline. And I think there's a pretty big window for people who are really doing this to compound that growth. But maybe it's 2, I don't know. Maybe it's 10. We'll find out. That's the only question I have about all this. Is not like, is it coming? And is it going to be transformational? But like, what is the appropriate use of energy and effort and opportunity cost and resources, to kind of try to front run it?
Chris,
when they, yeah, go ahead.
have you built anything sort of, you guys are all titans of industry and real estate, but like, what are do you have any personal use cases that you built anything for
Yeah. So
outside of your business?
yeah, I'm actually going to ask Jack to test for me this kind of like obsession project I've been working on. But it's sort of it's kind of like an AI assisted, to-do list and notes app. So basically it's in, email, Teams, Slack, and it's sort of got, it goes through and it picks up, goes through like 30, 90 days of your email and builds kind of like a basic map of your world, and then it's sort of picking up, 60-ish%, 80%, at first, of like the stuff that would make it onto a to-do list.
Interesting.
And then you can kind of manage and kind of clear. It's not telling you what to do. It's not telling you how to do it. It's not telling you what's important. It's not scheduling.
What is it doing?
The idea is like, for me, I have so many things coming at me, like offloading the cognitive load of maintaining a to-do list is been one of my, kind of, yeah.
Does it then like sort of like put things in buckets for you, like so you can focus on this aspect or something like that? Like what's the output of what it's
so
doing?
so I first tried to have it put everything in buckets, and it couldn't get the buckets right, and it was overly prescriptive,
Yes.
and all that stuff. So it focused much more on kind of like markers of, so everything comes in, it gets sort of, it maps the people, nodes, like, all this stuff for kind of like semantic similarity and like all this stuff. So there's a lot of stuff kind of going on, behind the scenes. But what it's really just doing is it's saying, this is a task. Do you want to do it now? Take it off the list. Has it already been handled? Or do you want to hit snooze and be reminded about it later?
That's interesting.
So, it's very simple. It's a very simple interface. And then you can also put your own, you could take a picture of your car registration and save it on your notes, and you can query that at all, so it's got all that context. So basically it's like, the idea is very flat, very, very simple surface, but then it's aggregating, cause for me, it's like, I get 5 minutes and I'm like, what do I need to do? What am I going to do? So I can look at that list. And every time I've tried to, and then it's like, what do people, and it's also good at recognizing the nature of like open loops. So
That's
it's like, what do I owe people? What do people owe me? What am I maybe not paying attention to that I want to? And then I can flag things. So I could say like, if we were having a dialogue about this topic, I could create a topic, and then things that come in, it would tag relative to that topic. And then when that topic's done, it just goes away. Right.
That's very cool.
Yeah. Did you build it in Claude Code? Did you build it in like Cursor, Lovable? What'd you build it in?
I generally am doing Claude Code in VS Code, like, in the IDE, and then it's all in Supabase for the database, and then the app is in Vercel.
Have you ever done any does it run on your iPhone? Is it strictly desktop?
No, it's a web app. I mean, I've got it saved down as a web app on my homepage, so it's like it's the main. It's what I'm using as like my main to-do list right now. And
Jack, have you considered, so like I just got access to build an app on top of Outlook about a week and a half ago. I've been working on it without access, and I'm still trying, like, after I got access, I was like, oh man, I'm going to develop email zen, just like I'll spend 3 seconds a day at, 5 times a day in my email. And I still have yet to sort of find the killer app for all of that access. And I'm wondering if you've had it. Jack, have you considered that? Like, how do we take all of the email that we get and make sense of it in some way that I just don't know it yet. I haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, so I feel like I promise I'm answering your question. I feel like because software has become so cheap, because coding has become so cheap, now everyone can create custom software, and that's very exciting. And everyone's going to create custom software for themselves, their particular use case. But if we ignore the differences in human personality, there is no such thing as a productivity app that everyone's going to like, because I'm making up numbers. I'm completely making up numbers because there's 20 different clusters of personality in the world. And those 20 people are fundamentally biologically wired different. Like I believe that there's a biological basis of behavior that we call personality. And so like, you're not going to have a God app, you're not going to have one app to rule all others because it's so cheap to create a custom one that, Kris, I imagine you're building your perfect productivity app, but it's different, but it's going to be different than my perfect personality or my perfect productivity app. Cause like my weaknesses are
That's
not
what I
yours
will.
and my
Yeah.
strengths are not yours,
So that's what I'm very interested to kind of find out here. So what the initial versions of it, like for sure. Right. Because ultimately, I think if I can use this for different people in the company, all of a sudden then it's like you start to get some visibility in like priorities across the company and, things that are and the open loops and all that stuff. But I think as soon as you start saying like, what's important and like, how do you do things? And like, you did then like 100%, you're right. I think the question is like, what markers are there of what you think is important and what David thinks is important, what Craig thinks are important that show up in the metadata, that show up, is semantically that independent of how you're using that can reflect the priorities you're putting on it.
Yeah,
like,
I might be a little. I might be like a few degrees off from Jack's assessment in that I would say. I guess I disagree, but not completely. I think that the ideal productivity app kind of takes into account that there are all of these different types of personalities, and what it can do is identify where you're inefficient and where you're
yes.
dropping the ball,
Yeah,
regardless of
that's
your
exactly what I think.
personality type.
I think, yeah, like the best productivity app would be one where you can select your personality and be like, there's actually 20 different versions of it. It's all gathering the same data, but it's presenting things in different priorities, and the reminders are of a different nature, and the to-do list is featured more prominently or less prominently as like a driving feature behind it. Cause like I get along just fine in email. I'm one of those people who I have 0 unread emails. I have 0 things in my junk mail, and my to-do list is my flags. And when there are more than 15 flags, my stress level goes up, and I work on those flags until my flags go down below 15, and then I can sleep at night. I am like, so I'm like, organization is not like the thing for me. What I could use help with is a reminder to have lunch with so and so, and like to call to like call this person. Like that's where I am weak, but it is not, so like where I'm weak is completely different than what you guys are weak. So like it's, it's going to be a different thing that like actually makes my life better. But a better to-do list is not interesting to me. Like the flags work just fine for me. Like
This is why I ditched my Aura ring.
you what?
You
This is
ditched
why
your
I
what?
ditched my
His
Aura
Aura
ring.
ring.
Because it was like I would get this like it wasn't because it wasn't interesting information, but then I'd get this alert saying like, your readiness score is low today, so like you should really take it easy, you know. And
What
I'm
it's really
like,
saying is keep your subscription.
I'm like,
Solid advice.
I'm like, you're right. I should take it easy today, which is like not what I need, like at all. What I need is somebody to say, like, you didn't sleep very well last night, so you're gonna have to get your shit together. It's not gonna be a great
So
day.
order a triple shot. Yeah.
Focus,
You
get
just
ready to show
give
it.
me my
I
Tony
like that, and
Robbins
that's helpful. That would be helpful to me, but I couldn't set that personality. But you will be able to in like 5 minutes, right?
Craig had this idea. Craig introduced this idea to me 3-4 months ago, and he was showing me what he was building with his OpenClaw with Rocky, and he built it in a way that it was like he had different motivators. He was talking about the Enneagram and had different motivators, and he was just like, look, I've created this place where I come to work and I'm happy here because it reminds me to do push-ups, and it talks to me like Tony Robbins. And I'm like, oh my God, that's fucking beautiful. This is not where I want to live, but oh my
Yeah.
God, like, look at this. Like, but like, there's a version, right? But there's a version for everybody. And so I think that, it's going to be like, what's your role plus what's your personality equals what that'll be like that would be a really, I don't know if that's going to like the end state, but that'd be a really interesting stop on the train, it'd be a really interesting station for the train to get to.
So I think the last component that's missing there is fragmented context. And if whatever you're applying to whatever those, role, personality, whatever, right? it's limited to these fragmented domains, but can have a more holistic view of like what's flowing across your screen, what's flowing through your world, all that stuff. That I think is where the architecture comes in.
I think when you take a look at, like I have my work and I have my personal life, and there's sort of KPIs that are, like if we're all sort of trying to be our better selves, there's certain things that you just have to do every day. And so part of the app that I built was like a dashboard of personal, like, hey, tell me what my checking account looks like every day. Tell me what my weight, I'm going to take my weight, my blood sugar, because I'm diabetic, like all of these things that just, and so that's on a dashboard, and the dashboard is obviously powered by something that knows me well and has a voice and sort of like its own personality. And like, that's what I was showing to Jack. And I thought, to have that in my hand, like, just to kind of keep me updated on exactly where I am and with my personal goals and my life goal and my work goals, not a bad thing, not a bad little apps. Like, I see where you're going with the productivity app.
As a visionary at my company, that's kind of my role. I think the perfect assistant for me, the perfect AI productivity tool for me would be something that recognizes what's not interesting to me and just does it. Not reminding me, hey, this has to, it's just do it. Don't tell me about it. Don't remind me 16 different ways. Because all I built when I built my own AI assistant was a constant reminder of all the things I don't have time to do. And it's really just, and kind of throwing in the face how poor of a delegator I am. And it's just, that's really what it's doing for me. Like, I need something that's just going to say, you know what, not this is something that's important to David, or this is something that's interesting to David, but this is something David is going to want to do. And this is something David is not going to want to do. And the things that David is not going to want to do, just go do it.
So
Yeah, like Kris,
I cut off. Go ahead, Jack.
well, you mentioned the context, like filling in the context, and yeah, like I guess I just wanted to make this point that, like, if you listen to a conversation, like if there's a recorded conversation, or and I listen to it and another person listens to it and another person listens to it, we did not all interpret the same things. We did all not take away the same things from that, right? Like so and so heard that Sally is upset. Another person heard that we have like some goals that might not be on course to meet, and I heard that there's an appointment on Friday afternoon. And those are like the take. If you ask me about like, hey, what are the most important things, or what did you learn from this conversation? Number one, 2, and 3 are different from 3 different people, and it's a function of their personality. In my opinion, it's a function of their personality. Like, the data comes in, gets processed based off of different, literally physically different parts of our brain, and we call that personality. But those are self-reinforcing mechanisms, right? Your personality gets more extreme as you get older, not less, right? Like, because those grooves just get deeper and deeper and deeper. So like, to the extent that an AI can listen to that conversation and interpret it through those different lenses and understand the nature of your bifocals is different than than somebody else's, and then fill in those gaps. That's like, yes, I agree, David. That's a super powerful tool.
Brain computer
the first iteration of like my list thing, actually, was set up to draft and send emails or Teams messages. And so, I could sort of say, draft a response to this, and it would show up in my drafts folder, in Outlook. I could take a quick look at it, and it would be, like that's as close as I got to like the delegating concept. What I found was it didn't know me quite well enough yet. I didn't try, like, didn't know, it didn't have enough context to know what, like, it was quick. It was still quicker for me to write it, and it was at the end of the day was a context and meaning issue, not like a mechanical issue. Like, I think the delegation function, was available, to the extent that the thing that had to be done was to, like, respond to so-and-so's email that I've been avoiding, right? That's technically easy, but like, the nuance is all in the context and the meaning, and the hallucination's expensive in that context, right? And so like, like low tolerance for risk, and, and so that's, for that risk. Other risk I appear to be okay with somehow. But yeah, I mean, I think that's all I think the personality thing, can't be overstated, Jack, because I think it's the human thing at the end of the day. And like, you rapidly hit this point where you're not, now you have things that are kind of complex, and it's hard to explain. It's hard to explain why something's important and how something's important and why this situation is a little different than this situation. Right. And that, I think it's, you try to kind of, AI stuff in that category, and you run into the limits of, of prompting and context management and all that stuff pretty quickly. And it's super interesting, because that's where, you're the people who are good at managing AI, like, are always going to be necessary. Right. And then, and those lines may change, but right here, right now, that's where I hit it pretty fast still.
I mean, this is just a prediction, but I think that, like, like the dot sol, the dot md, the skills files, I feel like there's a missing piece of that before this stuff gets really good, and that is that you have to give it a personality. Like, you like and it or you have to give it all the personalities, but then and understand that it's going to be not you. It's not going to, it's, like, if you don't give it a personality, it will not mimic a human. And so, to the extent that you need it to the maximally if you want it to interact with other humans, well, then it needs a personality. Otherwise, it's obvious to humans that it doesn't have a personality, and we're like, it's clearly just a bot.
Well, that's
But
what
if
they're
you
that's
gave it
what
a
they're
specific personality, then it's like, oh, this might just be Sally that I'm texting with,
personalities will all live inside of the data centers that are being built. That's where the intent models are coming from.
It
It'll
may
have perfect memory of everything you've said to it, and the tone and the intent, and
well,
that's what the
that's
5
I
million
think
square foot that data center is for.
you touched on it, Greg. I mean, the reality, like, what is coming is the data centers that are coming, whether these are terrestrial or in space, are the idea is, I think, the driving force
Are they going to be in space so that they can get solar power? Is
Yeah.
that what?
in space, because, who wants a data center in
Yeah.
their neighborhood? I think that's
That's an interesting take on space-based solar that I hadn't heard before.
Well, it's happening.
Oh yeah,
Very
well,
much.
Elon Musk is I think driving that, and I think Bezos is probably not going to be too far behind. But whatever it is, it's context window. Like everything we've said, it is like, why do we need context engineers? Like, why can't I build an AI with a personality that's consistent? Like, why can't I? What is the missing link with all these SolMD files and skills files and all the different
Memory.
it's context window, right? Like, if the context window were 10 million tokens, right? If there were no practical limit to what could be ingested and computed, then yeah, I think that would be, I think from that perspective, we have a long way to go, because even if you had a 10 million token context window, it can't reason through that in a fast enough time to have a conversation over the phone. Right? It might be able to email back and forth, but that's okay. And that may be very, very useful. But in order to have the speed and the efficiency of, like, what a human brain can do, it needs to be able to take take all of the cumulative experiences it's ever had, distill it down to what is, I guess, what it can convince the being, whether it's human or non-human, on the other side, that it did come up with a meaningful and correct response to what that thing is. And I think it's context. I think it's just a tremendous amount of context that is going to be necessary to do that, and speed to reason through it. I don't know. It's all really, really cool.
I think that you can brute force intelligence with a large context window. Like, that's kind of like our proxy for a more complex neural net. It's just a larger context window, in the LLM as opposed to neural net. But yeah, larger context window certainly helps, but a smaller context window or a lesser model, given more clear instructions, given better architecture and schema, has the opportunity to perform just as well. You can use a lesser model with better architecture and get the same results as a stronger model with a larger context window, I would argue. So the best of both worlds would be the best model with a very thoughtful architecture and schema.
Well, I think, like, if you're building something, I think you want to have, like, you might be calling 3 or 4 different models at different levels for different tasks along the chain. Right. Because, for exactly that reason, which is, by the way, what we do. because like, when a lion comes, running around the tree, you're not like, like shaggy mane, like long claws, like big teeth, like moving really quickly. Like, let me think about this. It's it's like, and then you're up the tree, right? Before you even think about it, right? But then, other times you're thinking about what does it mean to be a human being? And like, you really want to, you really want to slow down and like get the noise out of there. So like that's exactly how we function, right? It's like we're prediction machines. This is how unconscious bias works, right? This is like why you get like all kinds of, our brains work very differently than the LLM kind of prediction models, but we are still like we fill in the minimum amount of information required for us to jump to a conclusion, right? That's like why Thanksgiving is so hard, right? So like, we
Kris, you are the
like,
king of metaphors, sir. Like,
so like,
you must have been an amazing journalist.
well, not amazing enough to still be doing it, thank God. But uh, the like, it's why you have to fight against that so hard to be like a reasonable, open-minded person.
Yeah, I think
That's like what we are wired to do. And then we have to sort of resist that, to grow. But it's like, it's this, it's we're still prediction engines, right? In our way, in a different way than the LLMs are, and then, so yeah, like I've got my like haiku, and then I've got my like 4.7 opus, whatever, right? And, I'm not bringing the same, loop inside my brain to like every situation any more than I'm bringing the same model to like, different steps of the process. And that's how you manage a token budget or latency or, whatever it is.
Anything else, Mr. Bevere, Mr. Moses?
Nah, Kris, really appreciate your time, man. Thanks so much. Looking
thanks.
forward to talking more with you about the stuff that you're working on. So thanks for your time today.
Yep. Thanks guys. This was great. Thank you for having me.
Dave, any last thoughts?
Well, are we gonna go back to committing to building something in the next week?
Well, it was such a lively conversation today. I couldn't show you guys my one shot from yesterday of an app, but be glad to show it off on the next one when it's beyond phase 2 of the build of 9. So hopefully finish that up today. I'll have something to show. Jack, did you? So Kris, Jack built an amazing tool, and then it toppled over on itself. And on the last podcast, he was talking about like, yeah, I'm just going to rip it down and start over again. And your prediction is that because you had gone through the pain of building the first one, that the second version would be, much faster, better, stronger. What's the outcome? Where are you with it?
So yeah, I'm ripping off this that you mentioned before at the beginning of the podcast, that John McCullen came up with, this basically like starter pack where everything's pre-wired. There's a bunch of company context in there. It's just kind of like it feels to me just like a stronger foundation to build. And the idea is that like, and we'll continue to refine it and make it better and put more best practices in there and like put more, put more architectural context into it. And the company will manage that file. And then the managers can use that as the baseline and customize it for what they're interested in. So I'm going down that path and using that baseline. Like John gave it to me 2 days ago. So I haven't rebuilt everything yet, but I feel like I'm building on a stronger foundation. So we will see next week.
Build it as a modular tool, sir. Not a bolt,
Greg,
not a bolt.
Claude Code or Codex 5.5?
Don't know enough yet. I had a great session with it last night. I'll let you know on the next one. I was impressed. It was
With
it was
5.5?
fast. 5.5 max. It was very fast. And I thought its assessment of what I was building in Claude Code was pretty spot on. All right, guys. Well, listen, Kris, again, thank you so much for your time. Very generous of you. I can't imagine how busy you must be. So thank you for coming on. Love to have you back on again when you have something to report, Kris. Come on. Like, when you're working on something.
Yeah, I mean, you're doing something with AI. Geez.
Yeah. Yeah. When you really start using the tools. So thank you, Kris, and all the best to you. And folks, we hope you enjoyed this one. You can catch us online on YouTube or anywhere where you can find podcasts. It's forked.ai, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you, Kris.